Okay, it's all set.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. This is the November 5th, 2021 Electrical Work Examining Board meeting. To thank everybody in advance for attending. Let the record show at this point that all board members are present, with the exception of Mr. Jennings, who did notify me he wasn't going to be able to make it last minute, and Mr. John Yusa as well. First item of business for the board members is the review of the draft minutes that were put in your packet for the August 13th meeting. I trust everybody's reviewed those. If there are no questions, I entertain a motion from someone.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to accept the minutes from our last meeting.
Second. Okay, so Paul Costello, second Mr. Bird's motion. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, you do it by a show of hands. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes. Next item on our agenda is the comments or concerns of any person present here today. Karen, do we have anybody that's here to talk about something that's not on the agenda? Do you know?
Peter Childry and James Savoy, as I mentioned, I don't know if you want to see what they wanted to address today.
Okay, sure. Let me. Peter Childry, are you there?
Yes. Hi. So I was just asking Richard about continuing education for 2022, and he sent me the agenda. So I thought I would attend so I could hear what was going on with that. But I don't have anything else.
Oh, okay. And what about Jim Savoy?
He's here for the same reason.
Okay.
Just observing and trying to learn from you, Larry.
Good luck there. Okay. Anyone? That's it. Those are the only two public people out there.
And then we have Greg Williams. Let me just talk. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Would you like to let the chairperson know what you're here, what you're attending the meeting for? I assume it's your application.
Yes, ma'am. I saw that there was a review today and that the Zoom meeting was public, so I thought I would take the time to watch. Or if you had any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else out there, Karen?
And then we have Evan Dantos, who should be able to hear us. Usually he's here to observe. Can you hear us, Evan?
Observing, I believe, yeah. Evan?
Usually, yeah.
Okay.
I'm not sure. He may not be able to hear us. But that's who that is. I believe it's Evan Dantos from Robinson and Cole.
Right.
And Howard Osden is also observing, and that's about it.
Okay. All right, so we can move forward here. Board also received a copy of the complaint status from Janita and Company, excuse me. I noticed it's fairly short, which is, I guess, a good thing. I've taken a look at it. I've got one question, but does
And Mr. Chairman,
yeah,
because this is a public forum,
yeah,
and because the question you're going to ask involves the first complaint on that list, it was inadvertently closed and it's open, and I will be working with the inspector on that matter.
okay.
Okay, so
I'm amazed at how well you read my mind.
well, I knew it was coming as soon as I ran the report, and I had, and the unfortunately, the inspector was on vacation.
That's okay.
So we have since had a discussion and we are addressing it and it is not closed.
Okay. Thank you for that, Janita.
You're welcome, sir.
Any other questions on the report by the board members?
Nope, I kind of had the same question, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right. Well, I just want to thank you for getting the report to us so timely so that we can take a look at it and digest it. So thank everyone for their efforts in putting these things together, because I know it takes a lot of time and people are working, I don't want to say handicapped because it's not fair, but they're working under difficult situations these days. So again, thank you for that.
You're welcome,
Mr. Chairman, this is Pamela Brown, Director of Investigations.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention that we have hired our newest inspector. He was supposed to be here today, or actually I had him scheduled for today, but Janita's got him out in the field, off and running with doing some inspections and field training today. Next time around, we will introduce him. So we can always use more staff, but at least we have one additional person, and his name is Ernest Thigpen. He comes from the city of Hartford as an inspector, so not as a building official, from the fire department inspector. So we will introduce him the next time around.
What was his last name?
Thigpen, Thigpen.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yep. Great. All right. Well, that's good. I'm glad we hired another inspector out there.
Thank you.
Kind of cold day to get started, but that's all right.
Well, that's Janita for you. Rain, sleet, or snow, you're out in the field.
Yeah, that's right.
Hey, not for nothing. I've been on top of buildings with ice and snow on top of the roof, running across the roof. Got to break them in good and early.
There you go. Thank you. Thank you, Janita.
You're welcome, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, the board members.
Yeah, any questions on the investigation report by any board members? Again, no, seeing none. Okay, great. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Under old business, our workforce groups, as far as the continued education task force working group, we have submitted some stuff to the department, as well as excuse me, license qualification group is also, and they looked at that, and I know Leslie's going to make a comment in a few minutes here relative to one of the items in particular that I've got on the agenda. So that those task force reports have been looked at, and they're going to be continue to be addressed as we move on here. They certainly have not been pushed off to the side, so I appreciate that. The second item is House Bill number 6100, or Public Act 2137, concerning Department of Consumer Protection, licensing, enforcement, antitrust issues, and the palliative use of marijuana and revisions to liquor control, which is a very large bill put out by the department that covers a number of things. At this point, so I don't want to hold Leslie up either. I'd like to ask Leslie to address this as it stands right now for the board.
Morning.
Good morning.
So this bill is law now. This was passed last session. As you know, there was an issue with a section on contracting, which was a drafting error. So in effect, the way it was drafted would force you to enter into contracts for would force electricians and plumbers and all of the occupational and professional licensees to enter into, under the chapter, to enter into contracts for everything. And so that wasn't the intent. And so we realized there was a drafting error there. And Paulette, who's here today as well with us, drafted some language for this coming session to fix that. I think the language, which I've sent to Larry, I think addresses the issue. It will not require everything to be, it will not require contracts for everything, but it will require, when there is a contract, there will be standards to adhere to when there is a contract, and when there is not a contract, it will require on an invoice that whoever did the work, the license is on the actual invoice. So that addresses, I think, it addresses what we are trying to capture during the last session, and that is in this public act. Plus, it addresses all the concerns that we realized that were raised, that we did in the unintended consequences of what the language would have done in this public act. So, or what the language does do in this public act that we're now fixing.
Let me let Paulette chime in here on that issue as well,
Paulette,
if she'd like to.
Oh, good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's well.
Yep.
Nice frosty fall day. I don't have anything to comment. I think that Leslie has covered the things that hopefully we've accomplished in addressing all the concerns when the first draft went out, where it seemed as though we only wanted there to be contracts. And so now with the invoice aspect of it, I think everything's covered.
If I may, I did take a quick look at it when I got it yesterday, and I think, and Paulette and Leslie, you can correct me if I'm wrong in my interpretation, that number one, it addresses emergency service situations, okay, for emergency situation like during a storm or something, whatever the emergency might be. Somebody cuts down a tree and takes the service off their building. That can't necessarily write a contract up. It's got to be repaired right then and there. However, in lieu of that, you can then, when you send the invoice, you need to include most everything that's within HB 61 as it pertains to that issue, meaning what was done, the date, who did it, et cetera, and so forth, license numbers and what have you. So that's kind of like the major change to it, or modification to deal with an issue that was raised by some of the industry. The only thing I didn't see, and I may have misread it, so it was the industry. We were hearing back from some people, I have, anyway, and I think a couple of board members may have, concern over the need to write a contract, not so much the need for that, but to include in the contract the names and license numbers of the mechanic that's actually performing the work on those days that they're working there. There seems to be a feeling of creates an additional burden for the contractor in that regard. And I guess if you can explain to us, for the board, the logic or reasoning behind it would be helpful in that regard. So
I'll start, and then Paula and Pam, feel free to chime in. But the issue is that it's not always clear who actually conducted the work when we receive a complaint. And so when the investigators go to investigate, it's not always clear who actually, which licensee actually conducted the work. And so we knew there were concerns. We tried to address those concerns during the last session and amended the language that actually did pass to allow more flexibility when adding, to be able to add people, licensees to the contract. So we tried to make that more flexible with the requirements for contracts to address those concerns. But in fact, the genesis of this to begin with was the fact that our investigations team was having some challenges when receiving complaints when they were trying to determine which licensee actually conducted the work. So that's actually what sort of led us down this path to the language that did pass last session. We did hear everyone's concerns about having more flexibility there. So, and we added language that was signed off on by some folks. I don't remember exactly who, but maybe no one here. So I'm not saying it was anyone here. that seemed to sort of address those concerns, and we proceeded. So there's more flexibility there at this point. But again, the bigger challenge then was that the language that passed would unintentionally require everything have a contract, which was, we actually were trying to get at. Frankly, there's a lot more work done, as I understand it, on the invoicing end, not on the contract end. And so, that's been a real challenge. So we want to just make sure that whichever licensee actually goes out and does the work, that their license number's on the invoice. So this language that, as we discussed, that Paulette drafted, fixes all of that too.
So is it reasonable to assume that with the licensee that actually performed the work for the contractor on the job, and I'm just going to make a hypothetical, let's say it was there were code violations or workmanship issues that are being claimed, would it be the intent to bring that licensee in as part of the complaint and possibly even take action on that licensee's license?
I will. I could answer that, but I'm going to defer to Pam here.
Yes, that is correct. Pamela Brown, Director of Investigations. One of our cases, which I won't talk about here, but it's very public, we have a large amount of complaints, and we don't know who actually performed the work. So when I raised this issue a few years ago with Leslie, it was just simply, we need to have in writing on the invoice who performed the work. As you know, in the MOU, we charge the individual. If it's a company name that comes forward, the company didn't do the work. It's who did the actual work, the licensee that was on that job site. Homeowners aren't paying attention, who's there, they sign off and they're happy with the company name. But when then something goes wrong, they file a complaint, then Janita has to do a lot of research. We have an inspection aide who also does research to try to narrow down what we can find out. We don't always get cooperation with the business owner. So this is a way to help us from the beginning to know if it's, Pamela Brown who performed the work, then we're going to look there for competency. Did they have a proper license for the work performed as well, in addition to any other issues that is brought forth through that complaint.
So it's quite conceivable, quite conceivable then that let's say the E2 journeyman that performed the work, who works for an E1 contractor, who has the contract on the job, that E2 journeyman could be held liable for the work and the problem.
Well,
and
we also have unlicensed individuals as well, so that's another way to find that out. Yeah.
Because so I guess what I'm getting at then, I'm just talking this openly between all of us right now. Does that mean that the journey person should carry some sort of insurance for installations and work and so forth, above and beyond what he would be covered by, if at all, his employer?
This is just for the credential. We're just looking to see who performed the work. So if they are working under the scope of their employer, then that's where the coverage would lie. So if you're working for, I don't want to raise any names.
No.
But you're under the employee and they send you out to that job. But at the same time, there's a responsibility to make sure that person holds the proper credential. And Janita, you can chime in. I see you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
Mr. Chairman, and the board, it's not a liability issue as far as insurance. That, as Director Brown said, would fall on the contractor or the owner of the company or the contractor of record, whoever sent the person out there. The problem comes to be, as we all know, the statutes say that the work is going to be done in a workmanship-like manner to code. And we all know that the statutes governing occupational licensing say that if you perform incompetent or negligent work or there are code violations, that the inspector that I assign the file to can cite that against, one, the installer, the E2, and two, the E1 who sent them there when we do the investigation. Or is that person really not an E2? They attempted to get an E2 3 or 4 years ago. They never reapplied, never got the test. The contractor is not maintaining copies of the records like they're supposed to by law. And we find out that they actually had the unlicensed person doing the work, and now there's code violations. So that all would become part and parcel of the investigatory report that, after and upon review, is forwarded to the legal department for review and the appropriate administrative action. It's not that that the department is trying to saddle Journey people to have liability insurance. They were sent there by their contractor, and the contractor has that. I think the difference would be is if the Journey person, whether it's electrical, plumbing, heating and cooling, or so on, is moonlighting. They're not a contractor and they're moonlighting. They're not getting a permit. Oh, geez. Rich Bird sold his E1 license and he let Pamela Brown, the E2, take the test, go do the job on her job for Paulette Annan, and here we are, So that was kind of the intent, to be able to help the investigations division, myself and my staff be able to determine who did the work, who's responsible, and to be able to move forward. Not that we were trying to saddle a properly licensed Journey person working for a properly licensed contractor with liability issues. That's the contractor and the contractor's insurance. It comes into play now. I got a Journey person moonlighting, or I've got a home improvement contractor who's there. Oh, I didn't do the electrical work. And Mr. Smith is saying, oh yeah, the carpenter did do the work. Or he had an employee do the work. That's what this was intended to be. Not that it was going to saddle any of the contractors and the Journey people with any extraneous paperwork or anything. It's who did it, how do we find them, and how do we get them reported to the appropriate board?
Wouldn't that maybe be almost better written that the contractor be responsible for listing everybody that works, and that would include the general contractor, the home improvement contractor, list everybody else, because to use your last example, you've got the, I'm going to say a home improvement contractor doing something, and he has one of his people or a friend of his who's unlicensed, whatnot, just do the electrical work or plumbing work, and something goes wrong with it. You don't get any license number, but at least you get the name of the people involved with the project. Leslie?
There are already contracting standards in the Home Improvement Act. So, and there are already, so that chapter, that section has already there have been for years contracting standards there. And so in fact, the language that was passed last session for your chapter was actually language that's already in the Home Improvement Act. So
Jackie, I believe you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm looking through the bill and I just had a question. So to confirm, is this for on the residential side or does this include commercial work too? And I'm sorry, I don't know this. I'm curious. Like if you're a commercial
it's-
electrical contractor and you're submitting an invoice to a general contractor, do you have to put every person who worked on that job and their license, or is it just on the residential side and service work?
So Paula, you can feel free to jump in, but first of all, it's not a bill, it is law now. I just want to make this passed already. So, and now we're trying to fix it to deal with the challenges that we already talked about with invoicing.
Sure.
But so that's just first. Secondly, and then again, and I'm going to defer to Paulette, but in a second, this just established contracting standards similar to home improvement contracting standards. And in fact, the language, the basis for the language came from that chapter. And it's for, if you don't have to put everybody who works for the business, but it's just whoever you plan on having work on the job, it can be easily amended.
Right. That's why I'm asking if it's commercial or residential, because on a commercial job, that could be an insane amount of work on the invoicing side. On a residential side, you're not gonna, I mean, I can't speak to every residential experience, but you're not going to have 20 electricians on a job on a house, but on a commercial job site, you could easily have 20 people on that job. So now you're keeping track of 20 people who are doing the installation and you can't really determine who did what on that job. So then you'd be going after potentially 20 people.
I would say though, well, it is for both, I believe. Paulette, correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection it's for both. I haven't looked at it for a little bit of time, but I think it was, and the intent, of course, was because we get complaints on both ends, right? We get complaints on work in residential and in commercial, and so, and again, the intent was for our investigations folks, as Janita and Pam spoke about, was to make sure that they could easily identify who did the work. And that was the intent. And yes, it does apply to both, but it applies to both because it takes an insane amount of time when we receive a complaint to get to the bottom of who actually conducted the work to try to figure out how to address the problem.
Sure, I understand the value of trying to make it easier to pursue people who are not performing the work in a manner that it should be performed. But I don't know if this will solve it on a commercial side, because you could have 20 or 30 electricians. You're never going to know who performed that specific task that is wrong. So the goal is hopefully that when it's being inspected, and you couldn't have a job where you have 20, 30 people on the commercial side where you don't have a building permit, so I'm just kind of curious how that could really be implemented or effective to know who did that poor workmanship on a commercial job.
Janita, Pam, would you like to speak to that?
I will just put this out there. Workmanship, technically, on any site, whether it's a commercial or a residential, falls under the permitting process and the code inspections to be performed by the AHJ, which is the local building authority, unless it's a state project, in which case the state building official's office will conduct the code inspections. We do licensing inspections, and when we go on a job site, that's what we're looking for. The problem sometimes comes into play when the consumer is alleging that there's all these code violations and we find out it's only a journey person, and that's usually on the residential side. I can't speak to the bill or what the intent was. I have nothing to do with that. I can only tell you that code is the building department's for permitting and inspection for code. We do licensing, compliance, educational outreach, and if you're not in compliance, there's a cost associated with it, and then the department will pursue it from there. I can't speak to the bill as to what his intent was. So that's what I can tell you as far as a workmanship issue. When we're on that job site doing an inspection, and if it's pointed out to us that this might not be to code, we will notify the local building department, and then it's up to them what they do with it. But we will always pursue the licensing entity at all times.
Thank you. Thanks, Janita. Appreciate that clarification too. Any other board member have a question? I didn't know if I saw somebody else's hand up, but I don't think, maybe I did or didn't. Anybody? Okay. Let me just say this, because what the intent here today was really to address the bill in regards to emergency services, what's been addressed here. And I'd have to say that in regards to the other section that we've got, portion of it that has the requirement to list the people that are working on the project, whether they're licensed, unlicensed, depending all the various situations that the department can run into. I would have to say that the this modification that was presented today will be brought before the legislature, and if the industry so feels that they need to address the listing of people and so forth, that would be the right time for it to take place. I raised the question just to get clarification here, and I think hopefully the department probably has heard that there's some concern over how this is done, and 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, who knows, 15 years down the road, when some of us aren't here dealing with this and somebody's reading this law, are they going to end up saying, oh, well, hey, we go after the journeyman here that did the job and what have you. And if that's at all a possibility, then the journey person's licensed people, I'm only talking about licensed people now, need to be advised of that and having some sort of coverage if they individually so desire, plain and simple. I also like to just make a note here that board member John Usage just joined us at about 9:30, and thank you for joining, John. Any other questions on the presentation on HB 6100 and the modifications that have been presented?
I just want to know, I'm sorry, because this is my first time being involved in this capacity. What is the next step for, like, we're having this conversation, there's going to be an amendment. What are next steps, and how do we help support the people on the call who are trying to work through this, to understand from this perspective what can be effectively implemented?
I'll try to answer that. I think first off, the bill will ultimately get to the legislators with the changes that was proposed
in the next legislative session. There's not going to be, okay,
in this session.
Okay.
And what they're going to be looking at is just that the emergency work, the portion of it that is of concern of the change.
Mhm.
If we or any part of the industry has to be concerned and want to address the issue of the licensed person and so forth, and the listing of people, and they would have to bring it up at that point, or through their lobbyists and what have you, raise a question on the bill. Is that a fair analogy, Leslie?
Right, that's right. So the changes that we discussed are changes that are in the DCP bill for this coming session that begins in February. If the concerns that have been discussed beyond that today about the requirements that the workers' licenses be also listed in the contract on the commercial end, if there are concerns about that, then that would be something that the industry could also ask the legislature to change next session. But our bill is already submitted for the session. Like, we can't add anymore at this point anyway. Like we did send everything to the governor's office already. But that's something we're happy to work with you all on moving forward.
Okay.
Yep. That answer your question, Jackie?
Yeah, because again, I see the practicality of it on a service side, an emergency service side, in a residential side.
Right.
I think it just becomes very challenging on a commercial side. And so that's,
But the-
I would just like to talk about that more when
but-
we get to that time.
Yeah, I understand. And
the
again,
bill-
I'm sorry, Larry. I'm sorry I interrupted. I want to just, again, the language, if you want to look through it more, and feel free to give me a call or,
Sure.
but we tried to, those concerns were raised last session, and we worked on language to try to make it so that there was more flexibility as a result of those concerns. So
Yeah, I'm
maybe-
sorry. I'm looking through the bill. I'm reading through it now, and I'm sure that there's more in there, and I'll reach out to you if I have other questions.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, I believe the real intent behind the bill with the department in any event was relative to the residential private sector.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I would love, I
the
totally
violence.
agree with supporting them in those efforts, because I know that it must be such a pain and it's very nomadic, and people who own a home and are not in the construction industry don't understand what they should be asking for or looking for. So, and until something goes wrong. So I get that.
Mr. Costello, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, and I agree with Jackie. She raises a great point, especially on the commercial side. We have projects that go possibly 2-3 years sometimes. And, right now I got projects with anywhere from 2 people to 80 people on a project, and they constantly go in and out. So maybe it's something the industry, we do have to get together and really take a strong look at it and
Yeah.
work together with the department for the
Okay.
unforeseen consequences. Yeah.
We can do that. It's a good agenda item for us outside of this meeting. So, okay, great. Leslie, thank you. Pam, thank you. And Paulette there, thank you as well for your input on this item in particular. Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
Chair, I would
Sure.
just like to add that, I'm in agreement with both Jackie and Paul on this issue, especially on the commercial end of the business. I think it has to be looked at a lot further because it does seem to open up a bigger issue with that. So
Okay.
I'm in full agreement with them on that it has to be taken a hard look at.
Okay.
For
I
the
think-
language.
Yeah, I think one other thing I'll just add here is that unfortunately the contractor out there, the small contractor, the contractors that are involved in maybe organizations and what have you that are not members generally don't hear about this information, and hopefully after this legislative session and this bill gets changed or whatever happens to it, that it be something that be added in the license renewal process to notify people that this is a requirement. So, and the best way to do that would be through the department. You'll find as we get further into the meeting today that I've included this within our continued education, and I'm not sure what the plumbers have done or haven't done, but they may do the same, I would think. Leslie?
I'm so sorry, Larry. I had a call from my kid's school just now, and I missed what you said. Oh.
That's okay. You took the important call.
Well, just in case,
Yeah.
it's cool. So anyway, so
Hey,
what,
yeah, what I was saying, the thing that's concerning overall sometimes is that the contractors that belong to organizations and what have you, they usually get this information passed down to them, and they're made aware of it. It's all the contractors that don't belong out there that don't ever know about this, and then all of a sudden, well, I didn't know about that. Nobody told me. The excuses, you guys have all heard them. I would just hope that after this legislative session, once this is modified and adjusted, that perhaps we can include that in our license renewal form, so that everybody's been notified of it. They're aware of it. And
Yeah, that's a good point. I will definitely also talk with team about that. I know that which when we do make changes, we usually do send like a mass email out to credential holders, depending on the change that's made and which credentials impacted. You know, with the email addresses, one of the challenges that people don't maintain, they don't inform the department when they change their email addresses. So a lot of people don't receive these notifications as a result of that. But I think when it comes to a lot of the changes you're talking about, like the CE change, for example, where we're, you know, moving the deadline 3 months prior to renewal. I'm pretty sure that an email went out to all the licensees for that. But I do think, to your point, that, you know, the other, you know, changes should also be something we consider, you know, trying to communicate with everybody in a way that.
Leslie, could I ask you to, can you check to see if anything did go out on 6100 as the way it was written relative to those items, the renewal the continuing education being completed 3 months prior, and even 6100 as it was presented?
Well, 600, I mean, the CE change is also in that bill, the same bill. So,
right.
So, but I don't, and I would say that my guess is, but I will double check. We notified, I'm pretty sure we sent an email out on the CE change, because that's about an individual licensee's responsibilities. I don't know that we sent anything out on the other change that we talked a lot about already this morning.
Yeah.
But I will check and let you know, Larry.
Yeah, just let me know, because I don't recall seeing anything on that myself. But
okay, on either. Okay, maybe we didn't then. Okay, I'll check.
Amongst the you know, the hundreds of emails we all get,
right,
certainly could have been missed. Okay, so I think we're done with that subject. Thank you, everybody. And let's move on. Excuse me. Oh yeah, next item is number 3 under old business. Proposed water meter license. All right, well, I'll try to make a long and continuing saga short, as much short as I can from our perspective. In particular, relative to the city of Norwalk, we've had some concerns about the water meter change outs going on down there, and the wiring that goes associated with it. Many people may or may not be familiar with the Schlumberger situation was relative to a similar situation up in the Hartford County area, in which the board made a decision on how that would be handled. After doing a lot of review, and in my feeling initially was that that water meter is transmitting electricity across the line to a reader and so forth, that and even though it's a low voltage cable, as they refer to it, similar to a telephone cable and or coaxial cable, that one of my concerns was there relative to the installation. It was kind of the lesser of my concerns, okay, but the installation, proper installation, there was some discussion at one point by another water department in a different town relative to tie wrapping the cable to the plumbing pipe, which, you know, is not acceptable. But my biggest concern was the bonding bonding jumper of that water meter. That there's many installations out there in a residential area that bonding jumper doesn't necessarily exist, yet the service is still being used for a ground or for a grounding system. To make the long story short, as it turns out, after many communications that Leslie's had back and forth with the attorneys and myself and the plumbing board chairman, it turns out that for all intents and purposes, this is all plug and play equipment. The There are no terminations being made by a person in the field. There are no cables being cut. They come in various lengths. So from my perspective, I decided in my last correspondence was that there is no electrical license needed relative to that portion of it, the installation of that cabling. However, the concern still exists relative to the bonding and jumper of that water meter, because as we that are involved in the electrical industry all know, you take that water meter, you separate it apart, and there's a potential there, and it's not a good thing. That I think is pretty much where we stand right now. We haven't had a response back from the attorneys representing the company for the city of Norwalk. So we will keep you updated on that. Is that a fair, my God, excuse me, fair analogy, Leslie?
I think Paula, Paula's here with us, and Paula actually, well, she and I have been working on this together. She is the one who has communicated directly with the attorney in Norwalk and has done a great job. And she's, even though this is like, seems like it's never going to end, because they have, you know, they just can't get to the point on some of the issues. But we are, so anyway, I'll let Paula speak to this.
So the last response that you had at Chairman Valerie's, I did send it to Kara Murphy, the attorney for the district. And so she responded that day to say that she would get back to me. And I also requested like a start date when they were planning to resume. So we're just waiting to get their final response. So that's where we're at.
Okay, that's pretty much where I thought. So, so that's really the update in that regard for relative to the water meters. Any questions by the board people? No. Okay. It's sometimes very amazing how such a simple little, relatively simple little project can consume so much of everybody's time and so much ultimately cost. Is ridiculous. And it all started with them looking basically for a special license to do this work. And the law is pretty clear. It's there. So we just have to follow the law. We don't need a special license. I mean, can you guys imagine, and Jackie, can you imagine having a special license, limited license for every town or county for water meter installations, or who knows what next, gas meters, although at least they have a bypass automatically on them. So, all right, anyway. The next is item number new business application review working group. There's a number of applications that the working group, which is, you all know I am on for the applications, along with Todd Birch and Rich Hobart, have come to a question relative and kind of looked to need some response and clarification on the 2-year waiting period to go from an E2 to an E1. Within your agenda today is a copy of the section of the chapter that addresses that. And I want to be looking for the board's input on it, not necessarily a final decision, but some sort of a input on how the board feels. And I'll just read that section. It's 20-334A, parentheses 1, parentheses A. An unlimited contractor's license may be issued to a person, okay, who has served as a journeyman in the trade for which such person seeks a license for not less than 2 years. And if such service as a journeyman was outside of the state, has furnished evidence satisfactory to the appropriate state board or the department that such service is comparable to similar service in the state, or has furnished satisfactory evidence of the education and experience and has passed an examination which has demonstrated that such person is competent in all aspects of such trade to be an unlimited contractor. The big question here, and there's a list of people listed there that are kind of in the table area right now, waiting for us to talk about this, is that there's situations where they may have an application, try to give you a hypothetical or actual without giving you names or states, where a person applies for an E2, an E1 to us. That person holds a contractor's, master's, whatever they might call it, in a particular state. We generally look at that, and if everything looks proper, we permit them to sit for an E2 exam. They take the E2 exam, they pass the E2 exam. Now they have a Connecticut journeyman's license. Okay. Their ultimate goal was to have a Connecticut unlimited contractor or contractor's license, even a limited contractor license. They reapply, it's less than 2 years, okay, that they've held the Connecticut license. And the feeling is that on their part and on part of the working group's part is that they should be permitted because they were a contractor in another state, okay, and they met the journeyman's requirements here in Connecticut and ultimately got the license through all the proper procedures. My position, well, I'm not going to tell you my position because I don't want to taint it right now. How does the board look at some of that? How do they interpret that? And
Can I ask sorry.
Yeah, you go ahead, right, Jackie.
Well, so can I ask a question just for my own understanding? When someone goes from an E2 to an E1, do they have to take a test? Is there like additional education on insurance and business regulations for them to go from an E2 to an E1?
The general answer is yes. And what they need to do is they have to, the E1 is a 2-part test. One is relative to the electrical industry per se, and the other is a business and law portion. Okay, the business and law portion, there are no required courses out there. They can purchase a book from the testing service relative to the business and law area that's being covered, such as, you know, unemployment compensation, et cetera, all the business portions that the contractor needs to look at. And they can, the test is, there's 2 tests. They take the business and law 1 point, and then take the technical, if you will, another point. They can pass one and not pass the other. Once they pass one, they just have to wait until they pass the second. Okay. Okay. Other board members and their feelings on that. So I'll put the question out this way. Should a person, given the example I just gave you, they have a contractor's license or a master's license, the electrical in another state, they get qualified here to take the E2 test, they take the E2 test, they pass the test. And at some point between when they pass the test and 2 years in that period, they come back and they want a waiver for the 2-year waiting period. How does the board feel about that? Where'd everybody go? Paul, I'm sorry, I didn't see a hand. I'm looking for you physically, and I keep missing you.
That's okay. I'm too used. I've been doing Zoom too long, I guess. I'm used to it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I kind of look at it the same as a Connecticut license holder. If I complete my apprenticeship, I obtain my journey person's license, I work my 2 years, I have to wait 2 additional years before I could apply for my contractor's license. Kind of feel everybody should be upheld to the same requirements as a Connecticut resident would be. I guess the question, if the individual has a contractor's license in another state to qualify, again, the problem I see is there's so many variables. Different editions of the adoption of the codes throughout the country. We're on the 17, others are on the 20, some may be on the 14 in some parts of the country still. The business law section, obviously it's another test. But again, not being familiar with our requirements, they just feel that should be the same requirement for everybody. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, and okay, and then Mr. Bird.
I do understand Paul's point in regards to following with Journeyman's requirements. The one thing that I think we have to take into consideration, we do have to look at, there are states that require, and one of our neighboring states, it is required to do this. They're required to have a journeyman's license as well as a contractor's license. And a contractor's license allows them to run a business, but the journeyman's license allows them to work in the field. So, there's a lot of variables to exactly what, Mr. Costello is talking about here in this situation. Not all states are like that, but I do know one of our neighboring states, you are required to have both licenses, the journeyman, which allows you to work in the field, and the contractor's license, which allows you to run the business. So I think we have to take a look at it uniquely, because if you read the definition of what we just read there, in that particular case, I believe both have been satisfied. They've had it, they have the journeyman's license, and they do hold the contractor's license to run a business. I think the checks and balances that we could look at is that, if another state is on let's say a code, we'll use the example of the 2014, and we're on the 17, I think the testing on the testing on our code would offset they would have to understand the 2017 code, or when we have our planned adoption of the 2020 code, that they would be required to be up to the most current codes standards that we apply in this state, as well as the business law portion of it, which allows for the contractor to fully understand our business laws in our state. So I think there's a lot of variables when it comes into play with this. And, I fully understand where Mr. Costello comes in on those comments.
Okay.
Can I ask another question?
Absolutely.
Sorry. So are they asking for a waiver so that way they could sit for the E1 exam and pass and go for those two sooner than 2 years? Is that essentially what they're asking to do?
No,
Or are they asking to skip the E1 certification and just get their contractor's license because they had the contractor's license in another state?
Well, initially, they are asking to go directly from the contractor's license that they have in another state to a contractor's license here in Connecticut. Position we've had on the working group, and even at this board, when the board was looking at applications many years ago. was that they still were required to hold the Connecticut E2 first, a journey person's license. The waiver, if you will, or the opportunity for the board to grant somebody to go for the E1 contractor's license prior to the 2 years was generally always done based on a hardship. Okay. And
How do you define a hardship? I mean, if you can make a living as an E2, you don't necessarily need an E1 to take care of your life, you know, for those 2 years. I don't really understand what a hardship would be.
a typical hardship, that as an example, that has been used in the past. You got a family business, you got a father-son business as an example. A father with a son who's a journeyman in the business. Something unfortunately has happened to the dad, or something, the dad is retiring and want to continue on with the family business and don't want to put all the rest of the employees out of work because dad's going to retire. We would consider that as a possible hardship and approve it for a period.
So yeah, I would never consider that a hardship unless the dad like had a freak heart attack or something like that. I think people just need to do better with succession planning and business planning.
Yeah, and that's generally what it is. It's usually
Okay.
a medical reason, Jackie. So
Okay.
Paulette has got her hand up, which I'm glad to see.
Hi. Oh, okay, I'm unmuted. Okay, great.
Yep, you're
So I'm, can you hear me? Are we good?
Yes, good.
Okay, all right. So what I think I'm hearing is that with respect to, and these are out-of-state applicants that want the E1, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So correct me if I'm wrong, but what I think I'm hearing from the board is that there is some understanding that there is a hardship element to this waiver for an out-of-state applicant. Is that correct? So typically, if the board is requiring 2 years as a journey person in Connecticut, then that's where they would consider a hardship to waive that. Am I understanding that before I go further? Is that what you're saying?
The hardship is usually a personal hardship, kind of as an example I made before, have to do with a medical situation. Not just a situation where I'm a contractor in another state and I just want to come here to Connecticut to do some work because I have a job down here for one of my national customers. And
Okay.
as such, I need to get a contractor's license.
So in our statute, in 20-334A, there is no hardship element that you're speaking to. I'm not sure where that's coming from. So in 20-334A, there's two pathways for an individual to be able to, who's out of state, to be able to show that they have comparable or equivalent experience in order to get the contractor's license. And so the two pathways are, the first is, give one sec. Okay, the first is experience comparable or equivalent to service in Connecticut. So that means you're looking at their experience in the state, their home state, or education, experience, and passage of an examination that demonstrates that the applicant has competence in all aspects of the trade. So again, this is information coming from their home state. So that's what we're looking at in order to determine whether this individual has proven that they should now hold a contractor's license in Connecticut. So, you know, I don't know where the hardship is coming from. This is expressly what the statute is saying that you should be considering to determine whether or not the person should now have the E1 license, or, you know, go to the examination or do the examination for the E1 license. So there is no hardship to consider. So I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page about what the elements are for consideration to allow a person from out of state to obtain an E1 license.
I think, Paula, where the term hardship came from was generally an applicant historically in the past, okay? Appeared before the board looking for the opportunity to take his E1 test and presented it to the board as a hardship, okay? And that's where the board started picking up and using the term hardship, that people started, there was a good reason to grant it, so to speak, sometimes. And that was based on prior legal advice provided to the board, so.
Okay.
It's, I mean, it goes back quite a few times ago.
Okay. So the board should be considering what the statute, which you have in the agenda, that's the elements, those are the elements that the board should be considering for each of those applicants, looking to their information in their home state and then comparing it to what's required in Connecticut. Because from what I understand, there's some states that have even higher requirements for a journey person, for example. So that's what the board should be doing in terms of determining whether these applicants should get the E1 license.
And candidly, one of the difficulties that happen too, that we come across is, and we're working on this, is the information that was requested of an applicant sometimes is not clear. And I don't disagree with you at all, Paula, because those are the two areas that I have underlined on that section of the statute. And it's up to the board or the working group in this case to make that determination if it's comparable to what we do here in the state of Connecticut.
Right. And be reminded that because of the North Carolina dental case,
right,
if the board does make a decision that's adverse to the applicant, then the commissioner may review it. And if after the review, the commissioner determines that the individual has proven and shown that they have the equivalent, comparable, et cetera, in order to get the E1 or sit for the examination for the E1, the commissioner has the authority to reject that decision as being anti-competitive. So, I would just advise the board, just make sure, I know that people sometimes it's hard for them to gather information and send it. If you really think that there's something that you really need that's missing in order for you to make your determination about equivalency and being comparable, and examinations are probably easy for them to provide examinations that they've taken in their home state, but really make sure you get that information, because in fairness to the applicant, of course, and not wanting to have a decision that's later on rejected by the commissioner for being anti-competitive. And not because that's the board's intent, but because that's factually how it turns out, because the information that we then review or the commissioner then reviews afterward demonstrates something different than what the board has decided.
Okay. I agree, Paula. Mr. Bird has his hand up, and then Mr. Osnet had his hand up, and then Mr. Yusha. So I'll take him in that order. Mr. Bird.
All right. Actually, I think Mr. Costello had his hand up just before mine. So no, you're good. Okay. I think the one thing that that we have to look at too is, we were talking about, or I spoke a little bit earlier about checks and balances. When the application comes in, is there any letter requirement that comes in that says that the license in that particular state through whatever agency issues that license is in good standing? I know other states, when you apply, you have to get a license, you have to get a letter from that department, a certified letter from that department stating that that license is in good standing. that you've met all the requirements of continuing education, license renewal fees and things of that nature. Is that something that is required on the application process, which
Right.
I don't see as part of it?
The answer to that question is no. Probably the simplest one.
The
I can
only
answer.
reason I asked the question is, the only reason I asked the question was because of that. I didn't see it anywhere in that particular portion. That may help with determining if the criteria of the individual has satisfactory evidence of the experience and education, if their license is in good standing in another state.
Correct. Yeah, and again, I'll just reiterate that we are looking at ways of putting together better information that goes out to an applicant with clarifying more items that need to be presented. Because unfortunately, sometimes what happens now, the application is going back and forth, and too much time is lost in fairness to the applicant that wants the license, and too much time is consumed doing this by the department and even the working group working on this stuff. So Mr. Osden was next. Howard, you're muted.
That was actually a mistake, Mr. Chairman. I was cleaning my keyboard.
Solitaire, huh? Okay. No problem. Mr. Youssef.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to address just two things, clarification of handicap. In the time that I've been on the board, which I guess somewhere in the area of 8-9 years, I could probably count on one hand the number of times that we have given out a hardship that I'm aware of, and they were generally involved in the fact that the owner of a company rather, passed away. And as you pointed out earlier, the son who was in the business or someone associated with the business needed to take it over to keep the business in operation for the benefit of employees and everything else. So was definitely a hardship. But again, this was the person who had a journey person's license and may have had only several months to go in that particular time frame before they could sit for the test. Nothing was given away. They had to actually sit for the test and pass the test. It was just the fact we accelerated the test process. That, I guess, probably covers what I had to say on that. As far as evidence goes, many times, and again, I would have to agree that an application probably containing a little bit more information other than just the person presenting a copy of their license with an application and asking us to sit and go through it for them was an interesting experience in many of those. And last but not least, we may not always be dealing with someone from the United States, as we've had people come in from overseas, South America, and places of that point where they've had schooling, and the only problem they may have is sitting to take a test because of a language barrier, but they certainly may have had the skills associated and even more education in certain countries that these people have come up before the board. So I'd have to say that there are a lot of variables, and each one of these has to be taken on an individual basis. And what we currently have now, I think, has served us well, leaving the board the ability to look at that individual and make up on that basis, rather than one stroke across the board fits everybody. Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, no, those are legitimate points and clarifications, Mr. Youssef. I think, and that's one of the things that we are struggling a little bit with this, and we, it's been a changing thing in this industry, and I don't mean our electrical industry, I mean for the boards, with the COVID and the Zoom meetings and so forth, and trying to get information and dealing with people. It was definitely much easier when you sat there across from somebody in a meeting, and you could get a good feel for what they were doing. But unfortunately, those are not the times we live in today. So as such, we are looking to try to improve that efficiency and at the same time be fair to applicants. Okay. And again, only because they're waiting, excuse me, they're looking to be able to not have to wait for that 2-year waiting period. Has a lot of this come up. I mean, also there's other areas where it comes up in too, but even somebody just coming from another state looking for an E2 or an unlimited, I mean, a limited journey person license. So just as we talked here today, there is no clean cut, in my opinion, if I'm reading everybody right here, that just because you have a license as a contractor in another state, are you entitled to one here in Connecticut, even though you have to take a test? However, what's mostly important is the background of how you obtained that contractor's license in that other state. Case in point, we know, for example, in New York, a lot of county licenses exist, okay, that don't require any training, okay, or very little training. There's areas, I believe up in Maine, for example, like boroughs of Maine, where you need to do electrical work. You go in and you pick out a permit, you file for a permit, and you fill out an application, and the application is for a contractor's license to do that work, and you pay a fee, and now you have a contractor's license. That situation, obviously, the New York situation I make reference to, does not meet the qualifications that we have here in the state of Connecticut at all. Not even from the first item. However, there are states that I truly believe do meet that qualification. Okay, depending on what that particular applicant has or hasn't done. Example, a person may have gotten a contractor's license in state A, which doesn't have any real criteria, okay, but then went to state B, okay, who had a reciprocal agreement with the state A to issue a license, and obtains a contractor's license in state B, and then it's coming to us to say, yeah, I have a contractor's license in state B, and I'm qualified. So the history gets kind of complex and complicated, but that's where we have to reach out to people. Mr. Costello, go ahead. You had your hand up, and then Mr. Yusuf.
Thank you. Actually, I was going to kind of touch on the same thing just before you started speaking to that, where someone may obtain a license through reciprocal in a sister state or something like that. The other issue is it's not uncommon for tradespeople to obtain a license, just pay the annual license fee for it, and not actually work in the industry for possibly 20 years. I've seen people that come to continue an ed class, just maintain their license. Meanwhile, they're in the fire service. When they retire from the fire service, police department, then they come back to the trade, or they use it as a fallback. There should be something in there where it's competency. It's more than just a time period. That 2 years minimum, that could be 20 years of actually not working in the industry. So I think it's a little too broad. I think really it needs to be qualification for testing has to be considered. It shouldn't just be automatic where I've held my license for 30 something years. Just because of that, does that qualify me to go across to other states and apply for it? And if I didn't work in the industry, I think those are some of the concerns.
Yeah. Well, and your point is well taken, because Right now, even a Connecticut person that gets their E2, they can pass the test, receive it in the mail today. Not work at all at the trade. They could be, or they might have an occupation in another area, but they wanted the electrical license for something down the road, and wait 2 years, have not touched a piece of electrical work, and then apply for their E1, and they technically, according to the law, covered the requirements. Within some of the groups that I set up this year, reviewing things, that is a recommendation that something we addressed, and we have recommended to the department. Unfortunately, we can't get everything in one legislative session, or else we would occupy the session altogether with thoughts.
So Chairperson, in your example right there where you said that the person could have no experience as a journey person and then get an E2, but isn't a journey person supposed to have a certain amount of years of experience?
Oh, no. What we're saying.
Miss something.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul, you want to respond to that?
Thank you, through the chair. I think one of the concerns, in speaking from experience through continuing education, we have license holders that will come to a CU class and they take an interest in maybe photovoltaics. And the reason I asked, well, why such an interest? Well, I haven't worked in the trade really in 15 years. I'm doing another occupation, but I still maintain my license. Over the last few years, we're seeing photovoltaics, we're seeing wind generation now, building automation. So the trade really has evolved pretty greatly in a lot of different aspects, where if they went through their apprenticeship and they've worked in the industry maybe 25 years ago, it's not the same installation we're doing today that we were doing 25 years ago. I think that's one of the concerns. I'm not sure.
Okay, so does continuing education not, because continuing education is a requirement for renewal of a license. Of course, we know people check it off and they haven't done their continuing ed, and we've done those audits. We know that's occurred. So, but in order for them to have received their journey person, even though it was 25 years ago, they did get the license because they did meet the requirements of the statute to get the journey person license. And that's the point. So in between that time where the person's not involved at all in the occupation, I thought we had something in our statute that says that if they're not using their license, they have to give it up. But maybe I'm making that up, and maybe I may be making that up. Maybe that's a different area that I'm responsible for. But continuing education is probably a way to keep people, you know, as an attorney, I mean, I have to keep up with my continuing education to make sure I know what I'm doing. Obviously, I'm still practicing, but for those who aren't, there's, you know, and they're holding their license, there's continuing education. I don't know, and I'm sure there's many discussions about, because, you know, we've heard that individuals who take these continuing education classes say, well, it's the same thing I'm taking every single time. It's the same exact thing. There's nothing new. And what am I learning, really? And that's probably another issue, but maybe that's where it gets fixed in the continuing education courses that are offered. I don't know, but if they have their license and they've met the requirements, not sure we can do anything about that. We couldn't take away their license for sure.
No, I don't think that's the case. I think the issue with what we're trying to say here, what probably should be said here, is that the person that applies for the journeyman's license is typically the apprentice that's completed his apprenticeship program. Okay. So today he completes his apprenticeship program, of which he learned the trade through the journeyman he worked for, working for a company.
Mm-hmm.
Now he goes and he takes his test. Okay. He passes the test. He now is a journeyman, holds a journeyman's license. One day to the next, you know, that one day, 24-hour period of time doesn't make him an experienced journeyman and experienced with the components that a journeyman have to take, responsibilities that a journeyman takes on. Okay. So now he works as a journeyman for a contractor for 2 years and he gains that knowledge. If he doesn't work for anybody for a couple of years, okay, and he just, as Mr. Costello said, has another trade he's interested in, and he just sits there and holds it. And now we say you're good to go take a contractor's E1 test. It's not any different than letting him do it day one. He hasn't gotten the education, the full education, and I think what happens is somebody said it here before, and you're absolutely right. Whoever said it, each and every application is an individual application with different set of circumstances, which makes it not necessarily difficult, okay, but providing the backup information for that so that the board or the working group can make an intelligent and informed decision is the critical part. Okay. So I know Mr. Bird has his hand up, but I don't know if anybody else, but let me just say this, that I appreciate the information that I've gotten so far, and I'm going to take that back to the working group at our next working group meeting. There are some applicants in this on here today, okay, that were listed here, just to give you a flavor of what we're doing, that we need to take another hard look at. So, Mr. Bird.
Mr. Chairman, you actually hit the statements that I was going to make in your comments here just recently. So thank you.
Okay. Any other board member have any questions, comments? John Yusa?
Yes, I think that one of the things that should be considered too is the expertise, experience, and maturity of the board members in reviewing these applications that come in. That's our job, certainly one that we get highly paid to do. It's number one. Number two is the fact that perhaps we could get on an application proof of actually working within the industry, and that would avoid the absenteeism of somebody being out of the industry for 20 years, simply taking a continuing ed course, which would not bring them up to all areas of a code book if they were out of the industry for 20 years. But actually, are you working and who you're working for would certainly not be, I don't think, anything derogatory. And one person you might remember that we had come in at one time looking for a Connecticut license. I think he had 16 or 18 other state licenses, and he actually came in with a hand truck with the documentation on there, which was not documentation of anything he had worked within, just copies of all of the different state license requirements in binder form. But I don't believe the man had all the experience that all 16 or 18 states had given him to work in to be that knowledgeable. So we get some interesting characters from time to time too. Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think we can close that item at this point. If the board so is agreeable, I think we've kind of got, I know I have a good feeling as to what to bring back to the board, the working group anyway. And I see Mr. Hurlbert's on the call here too, who's part of it. So he will also help communicate that to the group. I'd like to give everybody a 5-minute break. And we can return in 5 minutes.
I have to jump off.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Do you need me for anything? Chairperson Valeries, if not, I'm done.
I think now we've got discussion regarding OSHA 30, which is going to be very quick here. And then one thing that somehow I didn't get on the agenda, but is the continued education for 2022. And I know there's some people on here in particular that are interested in that, and it's something we need to address anyway.
But you don't need me for that, do you?
No.
Okay, all right.
You're always needed, Paulette, though.
Oh, you're so kind.
You
It's
you
very
too,
funny.
Leslie, if you're trying to leave. I see her.
Thank you, Chairman. I have to head to another meeting. Thank you very much.
I can imagine that. So, all
See you.
right. All right, let's take a 10-minute break, Karen.
Okay, I'm gonna,
Please stay connected while we're doing this.
I'm just gonna pause the recording.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Did you start the recording, Karen?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Would you like me to pause it again?
Is everybody back from the board? Let's see, John's here. Am I missing?
I think so, because Jackie wasn't coming back. We're on here.
Jennings out.
There's John.
There's John. Okay, good. Yeah, it's recording anyway, so we can get started.
It is, yep.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, so much for our break. 10 minutes goes by fast sometimes. Anyway, the next item on the agenda is continued discussion regarding OSHA 30 completion requirement for the approval of applications. I'm going to table that at this point. We need to do a little bit more. I need to do a little bit more investigation into that item. So if the board has no objection to that, we're going to table it. Okay.
No objection.
All right, thank you. Do we have any correspondence, Karen?
No, we don't.
Anything so, okay. And again, comments or concerns of anyone present today? I think the only one here right now would be Evan D, Greg Williams, and Peter Childry and Jim Savoy. Is there anybody in the waiting room that?
No.
Okay. Do any of those individuals have any comments? I'm going to address continued edit. That is the next item that inadvertently didn't get on the agenda. It's my fault.
Did you want me to allow them to speak at this time?
Yeah, if they do.
Okay. Greg Williams, he should be able to hear us. He's got his hand up.
Speak, okay. Hi, Mr. Williams.
Can you go ahead and speak?
Good morning, Chairman. Thank you for your time this morning.
Yep.
I can only speak to myself, obviously, personally. I appreciate everybody's comments. I personally am from Massachusetts. As you guys know, there are certain requirements. My intention was for hopefully my experiences here, along with the requirements from the state. As I interpret the statute, hopefully I would meet the qualifications to sit for your exam. It was my interpretation that I would need to pass your exam in order to obtain the E1 license under any circumstances. I wasn't necessarily looking for just an approval. That's really all I have is I'm just looking to take the test and prove that I do have the current knowledge and have I've gotten the Connecticut business law book and been studying it diligently.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, the information we just discussed prior to coming back from the break is going to be discussed with the working group that handles the applications right now. And you will hear back from through Karen. You will hear back on what we're looking to do. We may be asking for some additional information. When we went off on break there, I did take a quick second to look at your application, but I haven't really looked at it in any detail. So, but we will get back to you on your application, and I appreciate your input.
Understood. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Karen?
Okay, and then we have Peter and James Savoy. I don't know, you've already addressed them, I think, to hear about the CE, so I don't know, did you want to have them speak at this time, or?
Yeah, I'll let Peter come in, I guess, or My name is Peter.
We,
Peter, are you there?
Yes, hi, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any comments or questions at this time.
Okay, and are you concerned, you're just looking at the 2022 information that probably we're going to discuss?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and is that true with Peter, with the Jim? Because I know Jim's with you.
Yes, it's, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, I'm a provider and I'm just here to get as much information as I possibly can so that I can pass it along to as many licensed electricians, kind of a conduit between the board and the people in the field. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Jim. Karen, can you put Greg's hand down? Because I think it's been up since before. Or...
yeah, let me do that. Okay.
Oops, it's still up. Mr. Williams.
His hand is down though.
Oh, on my screen it's up. Okay. Oh, there it
Oh,
goes.
is it?
There it goes.
I guess there was a delay there.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so the next item we're going to talk about, and we're going to insert into our agenda here, is the continued education for 2022 requirements, not requirements, but curriculum. I sent out to all the board members and to Mr. Hurlbert and to Ms. Lehman a copy of a draft copy of the overall proposal, and basically the items here that would be of interest to the board that may or may not have changed is that on the front sheet, you know, provider applications will be reviewed on a rolling basis. That meaning that, you know, we don't have a deadline for those. And the way the current continued education law is written, can't have a deadline. So as they come in, we will review them. The next page actually addresses the unlimited. This whole package pretty much addresses the unlimited license holder, and for the most part will be duplicated for the limited license holder in part. What we've done is instead of having the providers submit bound or copies and binders and what have you of their program, and particularly in view of the fact that we still don't have staff fully or even close to fully back in operation at DCP, nor can we actually gain access to the building because of COVID. We're going to be asking them to, as we kind of did last year at the end, to submit them on 2 thumb drives, the complete package. And if it follows the same procedures we did last year, which I suspect it will, once those are arrived at the department, Karen will get those. Karen will distribute one out to myself. And as we did last year, I reviewed all of them and responded accordingly to the provider. Going down through this, other items here are pretty much standard. Not much has changed there, other than that the certificates need to say 2022 with the date, class, and time of the class, and so forth. All submittals at this point would still be sent to Mr. Hurlbert. Okay. At these, because they're going to be electronic now, it would be at dcp.occupationalprofessional@ct.gov location. Fire marshal certificate, it has not changed. No need for it to change, just a requirement. All the requirements for insurance and so forth remain. the evaluation form for the students to send back to the department remains the same. And so that's kind of the administrative end of the program. And then we get into the curriculum outline for 2022. What everybody has before them is the part 1, which is I've changed to a 1 hour period to cover general statutes and safeties. And as you notice, as you get to the bottom of the sheet there, besides having the normal sections that are not required to be discussed or talked at in class, they certainly can be, but they're not required because they're in there all the time in the booklet, and people have heard these already. But there are some a couple of new changes in regulations to be reviewed at each class, and one of them happens to be House Bill 6100, what we spoke about earlier today with Leslie O'Brien, and the requirements of that, and also House Bill 6378 or Public Act 21-154, which has to do with wages on public projects. And I've attached House Bill 6100 in part relative to the areas that were basically spoke about today, and have highlighted those things that were changed. At some point, we probably won't make any changes to this document because we'll be into continued education classes, and we can elaborate to the class that there is some potential changes coming that are being presented by the legislature. We can identify what those are. And in order to do that, my intent is to, once we approve the program here, is to schedule a Zoom meeting with the board and all the providers that are, in this case, offering only unlimited classes because of the content here, and going through with them basically what we're looking to do and why we're doing it the way we're doing it this year, as I'll explain further. And you'll also see that attached is that Public Act 21-154, which is an act codifying prevailing wage contract rates, which people need to know that do that type of work and are affected by those wages. Next is Exhibit A, which I inadvertently skipped over as I was going through this, which is identified as being attached. Excuse me. On the, just bear with me. Which is identified in previously here relative to Exhibit A. I can't put my finger on it right now, but it's under the second or third page. Just makes reference to it, and it has to do with the hiring. Oh, that's where it is. Makes reference to the hiring ratio. It's actually bear with me a second. It's actually at the very beginning of the curriculum outline where we list the very sections of the chapter 393, and it's relative to the second line item, hiring ratio regarding apprentices. I made reference to the Exhibit A below. We've included that again just because we want to make sure that people understand what that is, because there's still people out there that don't understand and the ratio and how to ask for some relief from that if they need to. Also covers the state building code. Again, reference so that everybody understands that as electrical installers, you're not just required to follow the NEC, but are other codes that you have to, and standards that you have to follow. And this is the reference location for them. Then the last part of section 1 is the safety. Okay, and as you'll see here, I put down insert board developed PowerPoint here. I'm working with Karen right now to be able to do that. And what we've done is we've, unlike in the past where we said to the industry, here's the topic, you develop the content of it. We've actually developed the content for it so that everybody will be delivering the same thing. And part of this comes as a result of a lot of demand or requirements from the last couple of years for calculations, which we'll get into a little further here. But Paul Costello, Rich Bird, Chris Brown have worked diligently on doing these portions of it. And for the most part, it's all PowerPoint. And I'm going to ask Paul if you can do the safety part first and show what we've done. Bear in mind, there's a lot of information here that he's going to show you, just like Mr. Bird is going to show you. And it won't ever be all completed in one day in order to get it done. So we may want to suggest cutting it off at a particular point. Okay. Paul, are you available to, can you share your screen?
Yeah, I'm gonna.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank
Hey,
you.
let's start over.
Oh, I just caught that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So some of the things that our task group kind of addressed were some of the concerns, and what we identified were touching base on the top 10 violations, OSHA citations in 2020. So what we did is put together each one of them, and I'll just kind of go through them rather quickly because there's quite a few other things within it. But obviously fall protection, as we know, has always been the most cited. And if you notice in the upper right-hand corner, what I tried to do was identify which standard they came out of. 1926, I represented in yellow. And you'll see the 1910 standard for general industry was a reference for hazard communications. Respiratory protection. And a lot of this due to COVID over the last couple of years. Scaffolding and other construction, ladders. Hazardous energy, lockout, tag out, and we'll touch more on lockout, tag out in depth when we get into some of the 70E. Another gen industry, powered industrial trucks. Fall protection requirements, 1926. Eye and face protection, more on the PPE with construction. And then finish it out with gen industry for protection for machinery and guarding of equipment. Then following up, after we kind of do a brief introduction and talk about the issues in construction and gen industry that we're seeing with citations, start to build on the electrical safety side of it with the introduction, bringing in the requirements for lockout, tag out, or control of hazardous energy. You know, just be mindful that it's not always, you know, we focus obviously on the electrical, but we got to be mindful of the other sources of energy that we got to protect workers from. Introduce 70E. Go through some of the definitions, make everybody aware of what they are, talk about the responsibility both of the employer and the employee. Some of the training requirements. And then also make, for no other words, we'll call it our customers, the affected employees, the end user what their responsibilities are while we're working on energized work. Go through a lockout tagout sequence. In addition to, and there'll be some slides coming up a little further, part of the handout packet will include an appendix with some information as part of the handout that'll be used as reference material. Go through a lockout tagout program. Looking at 70E in Article 120, setting up the testing requirements to verify the absence of voltage. And then also making them aware that there's different categories of test equipment to make sure that they're using the proper test equipment while validating the absence of voltage. And then jumping into 70E with the general requirements. And one of the reasons why we discussed it was we've seen some changes where some of this information has been taken out of Article 130 and brought earlier into 70 and Article 110 now. Getting familiar with the tables. PPE category tables. You know, I think in a lot of cases, if the equipment is not marked and tagged and labeled, too many times electricians just kind of fall back with going to 70 and automatically going to the table and thinking, okay, this is the equipment I'm working on. And they're not always mindful of, there are parameters in there that have to get addressed. And too often they just may look at the voltage requirements and say, okay, I'm going to be in a PPE 2 because I'm working on this equipment and it's greater than 240. So we're going to require them to do some calculations just to validate that they are allowed to do that. Looking at the PPE protective equipment based on the PPE category for the arc flash. Like I said, it's pretty lengthy, so I'll just kind of, at any point, if anybody has any questions, again, with the lockout tagout requirements. Again, with the general requirements in 110 now. Really, to work energize, it comes down to infeasibility. You know, it takes quite a bit now to actually be able to do any energized work, but we got to be mindful that we have to test for the absence of voltage, so that may not require an energized work permit, but we do have to provide safe work practices for it. And just going through. So now what we did is we put together some typical on-the-job task. And this is where I was making reference to some of the, I call them an appendix that would be part of the handout for every participant. Again, we're going to require anyone to bring 70E in as a document, but they can view it for free just by going to NFPA's website, as well as any of the other codes or standards that they publish. So within the appendix, we're going to have some one-line diagrams for the participants to reference, panel schedules, feeder schedules, transformer schedules. There's an arc flash study report in there, and then also the conductors and the C values as we start getting into the calculations that typically aren't that readily available. So just an example of a couple of shots of a one line. This is more of an illustration of the layout of the equipment, and then a more traditional one. The panel schedules, feeder schedules. Again, this one we're going to use to determine our calculations for fault current at different locations. Transformer schedule, so we get the impedance of the transformer for calculations. And the arc flash study report. So there'll be a couple different examples. They could go right to the arc flash label on the equipment that they're going to work off of, and from there determine what the incident energy is. In this case, it's 0.2 cal/centimeter squared at 18 inches. The equipment, actually there it is. This is HP1 panel. And then the C conductor values for the calculations. So task is, we're going to add a new wiring lab. It's going to require the installation of a panel. It's going to be supplied by a 480 volt panel HP1. And in order to perform the task, the installation, we have to put into an electrically safe work condition. So two different scenarios using the arc flash PPE incident energy analysis, where we do not have the labeling, or based on the category method in 7C15. So we just kind of walk them through each of them. So now what we're looking at is, you know, where do we provide lockout tag out after we kind of introduce it earlier? So we could find it either through the panel schedules, we go to the one-line diagrams. Again, we got some labeling. Looking for our PPE, so we're looking at insulated gloves based on the voltage. We get our working distances. Set up our arc flash boundaries. Again, incident energy. Again, so here we're using selection, the clothing based on the incident energy, not using the tables. And what is shown is the difference between the different categories when you do the comparison, where if you go with the PPE category rating, it's going to err on the side of caution. So typically you're going to dress in a higher category than your actual incident energy and your fault current may require. Again, this time now we're going to the PPE category based on the equipment. But in order to do that, we got to validate that the equipment doesn't exceed the parameters in the table. So this is where we have to do some fault current calculations. So again, now we're taking the information from the one-line diagrams and the panel schedules, and as well as a transformer schedule to determine the impedance of the transformer to get the fault current at different locations. And we should see the fault current starting to drop at different, as we get beyond the transformer for the service. This is where the C value will come in based on the conductor values. I'll bring it down further. Now we're looking at the fault on the line side of HP1. And that's where we have to dress the worker at this point. So based on that information, this is where we would determine what level of PPE is required. And just kind of do a analysis as far as using the incident energy method or the category method, the difference between them. Either way, it's still a 480 volt shock hazard. Our limited approach boundary and restricted boundaries are going to be the same. But the biggest difference to kind of point out to everyone is based on that low incident energy that through the arc flash analysis, through the study, it shows that the true value is only 0.2 cal compared to an 8 cal based off of the PPE category method. And just to show that, let's see if that goes away. Kind of hiding it there. But basically what it's showing, there it is. You know, it's kind of less than 10% or so difference between the short circuit through the calculation and through the arc flash study, just to show the difference between the two and kind of reiterate that it's always going to err on the side of caution if we use the tables in 70E compared to an actual arc flash study that was performed. So it is quite lengthy. And Mr. Chairman, as you said, you know, it could be probably broken out. And I think a lot will depend on each class. You know, from my experience, we have some classes sometimes where we got to supplement, add a little bit more. Other times you got to kind of hit the high points just to make sure you cover all the material in it. But just as an example of the appendix that would be in the booklet.
Right.
You know, all the different tables that we provided. So it's about 18 pages worth of reference material.
That includes the calculations area, particularly in the appendix?
No, this would just be more of the reference material.
Okay.
We'll have that as a separate packet for the providers.
Mr. Chairman?
No, I know, well, excuse me, Mr. Hughes. I know that there may be some people in the class that are taking, that are predominantly residential people. And may feel that this doesn't apply to them, but you know, it does in part, obviously, because they still have the potential for the arc flash and et cetera, even in a residential setting. Granted, it's much less, but nonetheless, they need to be, you know, totally aware of it. That's why, you know, just as a totally side comment, I really have a problem with home inspectors that do these home inspections, and they go out and they state that there's some double taps in a panel, for example. The only way they know that is by taking the cover off, and they should not be, and they're not licensed to do that, so they shouldn't be doing it. And then anyway, so I think this is excellent. One note I made here that I think we need to add to both PowerPoints is a comment that, and we can change this wording a little bit, but this shall not be reproduced or used in part or full for any other purpose other than the approved 2022 CE Connecticut CE program. We don't need people taking all of this hard work and taking pieces of it and utilizing it elsewhere. So I think we need to add that to it. Okay, Mr. Yusa, you had your hand up.
Two things. One, my commentary is a very impressive program, and knowing that a lot of work went into this, congratulations. And number two, unfortunately, I do have to leave at this time for a 12 noon appointment in another part of the state. So I will just see if there's any other comment directed toward me, and then unfortunately I will have to leave.
That'll leave 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 of us. Out of the, how many are appointed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, okay, we'll still have a quorum.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Let's see, I see another hand up there, but I'm not sure whose it is. Let me change my view, maybe I can. Karen, can you tell who has a hand up?
I'm looking, I don't see.
Oh, no, I'll take that back. I do not see anybody did that. I apologize. I was looking at something.
There's a comment by Todd Birch who says very impressive, just my opinion. And I didn't want to interrupt, but Todd Birch has joined us and he's available for any conversation you want to have with him.
Okay. Welcome, Mr. Birch.
Morning, Mr. Chairman and board.
Just to give you an idea where we're at, we're basically completed most of all of our agenda. We're just doing our continued ed for 2022. And that's actually our last part of the business, so you're certainly welcome to stay with us.
Appreciate that. Just wanted to pop in and be an observer because I think you guys are doing some wonderful work. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so any board member have any question about that part of the program so far? And I'll come back to Peter Childre and Jim Savoy too, but after we do the next part that Rich Bird will present. But the objective here is that and a lot of people have questions about when are we going to get when's it going to be available for us? And this year, unlike in the past, it's going to be have been completely done for you, which is what was our intent, and it's going to make it much easier for you to put your material together, which is mostly front end, and then of course this part. So we'll discuss that a little further. Mr. Bird, can you? So that would be part one, safety. Part two, our NEC calculations, which we've allowed 3 hours for, because out of the 4 hours, because we don't want to extend the program any longer than 4 hours for these people or for the poor instructors that have to do it. As I said earlier, there's been a lot of demand for calculations, and because we haven't adopted the next series of code, which I suspect we will next year or for the 2023 program, that we fill this program up with a lot of information that people have been asking for. And if we don't get through it all, which I tell you right now, we will not get through all of it. I seriously doubt that we will. And I don't know if anybody does get through it all, I'll be amazed and curious as to how they really did that. Because these parts are to be interactive with the class. So, Mr. Bird, if you would be so kind to present the code calculation aspect of it.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. We felt that we broke it out based on chapters. So as we start to scroll through here, what we find is that the first portion here is we have a question in regards to Article 110.14C, which is temperature limitations. So we have provided the actual question with a figure here and the actual code section and how it reads. And as we continue on, we just continue to put the answers with the calculations on how those have been arrived. So we do have a few questions based on the 60 degree, the 75 degree, greater than 100, less than 100 amp, and the temperature limitations. Again, continuing on with that. We also have conductors in the same raceway, derating the conductors as far as based on the number of current carrying conductors in a raceway. All right, also working clearances under 110.26, talking about some of the working clearances. Here you can see we have a sheetrock wall. We're interested in this panel HP1 and what the working clearances is, and basically the calculations on how to read the particular tables to get to that those particular figures. Again, same kind of thing, just a different, whoops, sorry about that. Just a different condition under this this particular question or this particular scenario. Again here, same thing based on working clearances, based on a totally different condition, and what the clearances would be for requirements for those particular or this particular scenario, excuse me. Moving on, we do have some chapter 2, which takes into consideration here the receptacle spacing in a dwelling unit, and we talk about that under 210.52A1 and A2. We do also talk about some requirements for your tap conductors for your wall ovens and ranges of that particular nature. We get into ungrounded conductors for your feeder demand for your two 3 kW electric ovens in a dwelling unit. Whoops, went through that with the particular answers. Fixed appliances in dwelling units with the nameplate markings. Keep in mind that this load is non-continuous, and being able to explain that situation. Again, getting into a little bit into article here 220 with the lighting loads for a 625 square foot structure. This would be in addition to a one-family dwelling unit. General lighting for a one-story office building with the measurements of 125 feet by 150. The office building shell is being built. Again, giving you the size, the stories. What you're going to do here is calculate the lighting and feeder. Excuse me, let me just change my view here quickly. I'm being blocked. Okay, here we go. No good place for me to put my, there it is. That's what I was looking to do. And here, just the lighting and receptacle feeder demand in volt amperes, taking into consideration the receptacles. Again, this is basically looking at a warehouse. So we give you different scenarios in the different types of building construction. Now we're getting into a little bit when we get into Article 250 with grounding. And we're looking at some scenarios here under 250-66. Also tried to cover 250 102C 102C and 250-122. You can see just the different scenarios. Anybody's got a question, please feel free to stop me. I'm just trying to move the presentation forward. There are quite a few slides in this as we continue on here.
I mean, Rich, if you want to, in the interest of moving it forward, you can feel free to jump over to another chapter or whatever, if you so desire. Because I know there are a lot of slides. I forget how many slides there. It was about 140.
140, I believe.
And
yep. All right. So again, we just touched on a few of those. We did put in here a commercial, the number of receptacles, which sometimes, well, not sometimes, is misunderstood on this particular calculation, misused. Moving into chapter 3, we talked a little bit about burial depths. This is using table 300.5, column 1. Moving on into conductors and the ampacities of conductors with the ambient temperature adjustments and different things of that nature as we're going through here. Okay, moving on. We also have here junction box sizing for box volume. So we picked that up under Article 314. All right, moving on. Again, some more junction box fill questions here. This one here actually takes into consideration a device. Calculations for that. What size sizing of type NM cable. Again, wireway with conductor fill. This here talks about the ladder type cable tray with the fill. Moving into chapter 4, we talk a little bit about motors in this particular one, based on different types of terminations.
Mr. Brett,
and yes, sir.
Interrupt just to clarify for everybody too. Just as he's showing here, the question / problem comes up first, correct?
That is correct.
And then the intent here is to have the attendees try to work out the problem, okay? And the answers are in the next, the answers as well as the method of getting to the answer is well defined in the following slide, correct?
That is correct,
Okay,
Mr.
so
Chair.
the objective is not to just get to that second slide. It's let's get these people to open their books, use their calculators, and try to figure it out.
That is in the intent on all of the calculations, Mr. Chair. Yep.
Mr. Burke.
So, you know, talking about the when to use the table values, when to use nameplate values, going through with that, sizing of conductors, supplying motors, as well as overloads. Again, the intent would be to, you know, have them work the calculation out based on the question. Interest of time, I'm going to continue. There's multiple motor situations. They're talking about the design type of the motors. All right. There are criterias of multiple motors on a feeder. Here, now moving into talking in regards to transformers. This one here talks about primary protection and primary protection only. We look at primary and secondary protection. Okay, this one here, we're focusing on the primary protection. Moving into chapter 6, we talk here about some photovoltaic calculations based on the ambient temperatures and the sizing of the conductors. Chapter 8, we do move into here with, I think, a section where it's where we lose the fact that there are actual calculations here for sizing of communication cables in conduits, and that's kind of what we're talking about here based on that. You can see here again, number of Cat6 cables, excuse me, and the method and the calculation for that particular solution. Okay, we do have it in here with fiber. Now moving into chapter 9, we do have here determining the maximum number of conductors in the conduit. And this one happens to be a conduit nipple based on the overall length. The actual, here you can see the actual, based on the conductor fill, one conductor, two conductors, or in more than one conductor in this one, and explaining the different percentage fills based on the number of conductors in the conduit. Again, just flowing through, same kind of thing here. All right. Again, the different types of conduit being used to take into consideration, looking at the internal. Some additional calculations based on Ohm's law. And some voltage drop calculations to be reviewed as well. In numerous ways, calculating out based on circular mills, and then what the actual voltage drop is on that particular circuit. All right, again, some more power circuits. So that's pretty much it, Mr. Chair, in a nutshell. I know I moved through it pretty quickly, but if there are any questions, we will entertain any questions.
No, that's really fine. And I think we got the point across to the board and everybody else on the call as to what we're doing here and hopefully why we're doing it. As I said before, I'm working with Karen to develop the best way to provide that information in the overall application so the provider can download it. And we will make that happen. Are there any questions? Although everybody that we've worked on this is here, but any questions by us board members on any of it, or any thoughts other than the one I just put down about, all PowerPoint presentations shall not be reproduced or used in part or full for any other purpose other than the approved 2022 Connecticut continued education program for electricians. I think that should be put in there. We all work too hard on it to get it there. Okay. Karen, just if I can, and I know it's been crazy this week for everybody. Oh, now you got the shadow in your face.
I'm trying to move around this
I had it
time.
here. I was bouncing
Yeah.
around myself. Have you gotten any headway on how we will do that, or is that still in process?
It's still in the process. I'm gonna try and see how it works before I'm not sure exactly what questions I need to ask. So I'm gonna give it a try once it's approved.
Right.
I don't know when that will happen.
Well, that's the objective. Hopefully that'll be at this meeting. That's what we want to do. At this point, I know Peter Childry and Jim Savoy are here, Todd Birch and Howard Hosden. I'll take comments from them if they'd like to on what they've seen here. We'll start with Peter Childry. Peter?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think this is great that you're providing your curriculum to us providers. So everybody is on the same page with all their electricians in the seminars.
Jim Savoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the time. Excuse me. Mr. Chairman, you know, I've been doing classes for 16 years, and Peter and I have often talked about, wouldn't it be nice if there was a uniform presentation for everybody? We even went to the extent of saying if the state could provide a beginning to end PowerPoint, the providers would be thrilled, I think, to buy it from the state to offset any labor costs. And as Peter said, repeating conversations that we've had, uniformity. Because, Mr. Chairman, I'm sure you've been to everybody's meeting and you know they're all not the same.
Right.
My other point, having taught for you for many years, there's a lot of material there. Does the board wish to have that broken up over the next 2 years, say? Because Mr. Bird's presentation I could spend all day on, and Mr. Costello, because as you know, I also am an Osha trainer, I could take his presentation and do 5 or 6 hours with it. I think it's great. You guys have put a lot of effort into it, and it's given me more material than I can. I could use that dreaded, we could go back to 7 hours and I could get it all done, but I'd like to know, is that the board's wish that we kind of do half of Mr. Costello, half of Mr. Bird, and then next year do the second half?
Well, I think what we're looking at here is that, and as I said earlier, we know that 100% of this will never be covered in 4 hours. There's no question about it. I mean, and not having, especially in having any interactivity with the class, which is super important, as we all know. Excuse me. By the same token, every class will be a little different in that how much you can get through on each one of these programs based on the specific attendees in that class and how well they can accept some of this and how well they know some of this, or how many questions come out, and also how well an instructor can control their class as opposed to letting it go off sideways.
That hardly ever happens.
Yeah. So whereas at one point I would like to be able to draw a line in both of these presentations at some point for just this year. I like to try to get out as much as we can. And I think it, and also in view of the fact that 2023, we should be looking at the new code and changes in the new code, which will go back to doing that. We may incorporate some of this into the next year or the following year. So, and if by some chance, as it happened in the past, it doesn't get approved this year, the code, okay? Because it does have to go through legislators for their final approval, and ultimately it's a short session this year. And I've got a feeling they're gonna have a lot of stuff on the plate again. That we will be able to use some of it next year. So my gut feeling, and I'll take the feeling of the board before we close the meeting today, is to, shall we put it out there, test it, get feedback from the providers? How far did you get? Where was your cutoff? And then we'll take a look at that and say, okay, this is what we were able to get done this year as an average. And then potentially start putting some more of this back out next year, particularly if we have time. And we may be able to cut down on the safety side, not so much the safety side, because we want to continue that, but on the legislative, the laws and standards side, depending on how much changes in that area. A lot of times we don't have a lot of stuff that really has a direct impact. This year we do.
Thank you for your guidance, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. It's a big help.
Okay, you're welcome, Jim. Todd, Howard, you're there. Would you like to comment at all, or?
Me, Larry, I'm sorry.
No, I was asking Howard, but I don't know if he's. Howard?
Yeah, I'm still here. You had a question?
No, I was just wondering if you had any comment or question.
No, I don't. Thanks.
Okay, Howard. Yeah, Todd, that was to you.
I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. Again, as an observer and license holder in other occupations, we all know that as journeymen and women in specifically your license class, it's lifelong learning, plain and simple. I have to applaud your work that you've done here. Again, as an observer, but also integrating, look, you've got STEM education built right in there. Your voltage drops formulas and all this other stuff. It's trigonometry, plain and simple. We're trying to get so many more electricians to get into the field, yet nobody knows exactly how to guide an individual that's in high school, not in the vocational technical schools, but in high school itself, how to apply mathematics. There's a prime example right there. The safety component, I think, is absolutely wonderful. And I think you've done some yeoman's work to, as the previous speaker had stated, you've systemized from an industry standpoint exactly what's the need to be taught, not only for proficiency of the occupation, but for safety. There's no question about it. And in the spirit of lifelong learning for electricians. So I just, again, as an observer, I just thank you for having me join the meeting today, because you're doing some wonderful work to systemize this. And appreciate the conversation.
Okay, thank you, Todd. Certainly appreciate those kind words. And I'm sure everybody that worked on these programs appreciated them. Now, as I said earlier, this is strictly for the unlimited categories. John Yusa and his crew were working on the limited. And unfortunately, there's a miscommunication there, so they're still working on it. I was hoping they'd have theirs, but the majority of the licenses out there are unlimited. And that's why I want to get this rolled out as soon as we can. Particularly in view of the fact that in that House Bill 6100, there's a requirement in there relative to completing your continued ed. This is across the board for the department, any license and certification. 90 days prior to your license renewal date. I have a concern, especially on implementing that this year, and it went into effect in this past currently July. But I think that's something we have to look at, and I've talked a little bit to the commissioner about that. On somebody doesn't have it, they're continued ed completed 90 days before. I mean, again, it's a case that people need to be notified of this. And I don't believe there's been any email that went out from the department that I've seen anyway as a license holder. I don't know if anybody else may have seen one, but I don't think so, because I'm sure we would have all gotten calls and questions from the industry about that, as we always do. So I truly would like to see it happen in advance of license renewal going forward down the road here, because right now there is no requirement for that. It's kind of open-ended. By the same token, as we all know, you start getting the people come in at the last minute. They're the ones that are really least interested in continued ed usually, unless there was a personal issue going on. And those are the people that probably, I would say, ask the least amount of questions during a class. They kind of just sit there and they put their 4 hours in the seat, and they're doing it. And they're somewhere along the line, hopefully something sinks in. They hear something and they remember it. And we put these booklets out for them, and hopefully the reason for that is hopefully they look at them and reference it, because sooner or later they're going to come across that and say, how do I do that? Oh, wait a minute. I think there was a class that I had on that. Oh yeah, let me look at this book. And I think that's why we have one of the better, I don't say a better one, but a very good continued education program here in the state of Connecticut for electricians. We've all worked so hard over the years to keep improving it and keeping the quality up, that I think it's great. And again, I want to personally thank everybody that's worked on this unlimited license category curriculum for all the work they did. I mean, you guys have put a lot of hours into it, a lot of time, a lot of thought, a lot of process. These PowerPoints don't just develop on their own. It takes a lot of work. So from my standpoint as chairman, I want to thank each and every one of you for all your input, and I'll leave that at that. I will make a recommendation that your salaries be increased by 10%, and I think that'll be granted, and you'll see that big reflection in your next paycheck. 10% of zero is still zero. So if everybody's satisfied with this as presented, that I'd like to take a motion to approve as submitted this draft copy of both the administrative portion of it and the technical PowerPoints portions that we've seen here today.
Have a change that you wanted to make though about not being able to reproduce this information?
Yeah, what I can do, what we will do is we will put that at the front of each one of these PowerPoint presentations. I'll ask Mr. Byrne and Mr. Costello to put that. I'll send them the language that I had, which again is all PowerPoint, and I'll send this to you. All PowerPoint presentations shall not be reproduced or used in part or full for any other purpose other than the approved 2022 Connecticut CE program for electricians. And then I can resend you that program, Karen.
All right.
In the meanwhile, you're getting the other one working. It'll just be a case of making sure you just swap out the files.
Okay.
Okay. And I'm going to make one other change to this. What I saw, and that's on the third page. I said send all submittals to Rich Robert. I'm going to change that to email, as I did all the others, because Actually, I'll take that back. Thumb drives we want sent. Yeah, I'll take that back. I'll take that back. Scratch that remark.
Mr. Chair, it looks like we have a question or someone has their hand raised.
Oh, yeah, I think that's Jim Savoy.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Chairman. My only thought was it's a great idea about not allowing copy, but because the content is so voluminous that you might not want to limit yourself to the 2022 year. I would eliminate the date and just say this material cannot be copied without permission, because we're going to be using it again next cycle, I would guess. Thank you for your time, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, and that's a good, that's a legitimate point, because I can just cross out 2022 and you say any other purpose other than the approved Connecticut CE programs for electricians.
Mr. Chair, I do have to add one comment to this, and I think Mr. Costello will probably agree, and Mr. Brown will agree with this, is that when you start getting to the calculations, and some of the calculations, I know right now, according to the Codes and Standards Committee, the planned adoption of the 2020 National Electrical Code will fall under the 2022 Connecticut State Building Code, which is planned for October of 2022. Once we pick that up, the tables will change. The reference tables in Article 300, particularly in 310, have changed tremendously in the 2020 code. So those would have to be updated to reflect the current tables in Article 300, particularly in Chapter 3.
Okay. And that's proposed to be approved in, what do we say, August or
October, Mr. Chair.
October?
I'll let Mr. Costello speak more on that.
It should be after the license renewal period.
Correct.
Period. Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, so thank you, Ms. Berg. So looking forward, if we do continue material in later years of different portions of it, as Ms. Bird said, we will have to take a look at those reference tables. So right now, Codes and Standards, we are anticipating an October 1st adoption of the next state 2022 State Building Code referencing the 2020 NEC with those reflective changes.
Right.
And just one other point, Mr. Chair, in addition to your disclaimer, I think amongst us, we also made a discuss having legal maybe just make a disclaimer for any typos within the content. Just to put something in there, just to the best of our knowledge, we've caught everything, but something may have slipped through.
Okay, yeah, we can do that. Good point. Definitely. Okay, because if we, just going back to the adoption of the new code, the 2020 code for the 2022 building code, and the legislative change that makes it due 3 months prior to renewal, we are going to have I can see it now, we're going to have a period there, probably next year. If we try to, we're going to have to try to comply with that for the following year anyway. That there's going to be an overlap of having to do continued ed for 2022. And then within so many months, 2023, okay, in order to get the 2023 completed 3 months prior to that renewal date, which is going to drive a few people nuts. But, and I'm not totally sure that 90 days is the correct number anyway, so something we may talk about offline with the industry, and maybe we'll make a recommendation to change that. I mean, it's pretty aggressive, 90 days before. I mean,
Not everybody completed it yet.
I was just gonna say, we're in November and I think we still got quite a few people that haven't completed yet.
Yeah, last time I asked for check on that, it was like 25%. That had not about a month.
Yeah, I
ago.
knew the number was big, large.
No. Okay. All right. Is there a motion then? Mr. Byrd? Mr. Byrd?
Yes, I'll make the motion to approve it.
Okay.
I'll second the motion.
Okay. All right, so Mr. Byrd made a motion to approve the 2022 continued education program as presented here today, with the following caveats added relative to the PowerPoint presentations not being reproduced, and also asking legal for a disclaimer for any typos be included in this. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Any other discussion on this? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
So the motion carries. We have a quorum here to do that. So I want to really sincerely appreciate and extend my appreciation and thankfulness for all the hard work you guys have put into this program. I've joined you in some of those calls, and unfortunately I couldn't follow them due to my personal situation, but I know how much thought has gone into this, and I think it's probably the first time that the electrical board has ever stepped up and done something like this. And you, Mr. Savoy and Mr. Childry's point, quietly they've been asking for this, and I think most providers will be happy about it. I do plan on trying to set up a meeting, a Zoom meeting with all the providers that are doing unlimited. Okay, coordinate that with Karen. And one of the hard parts that we got to impress is that typically you get the provider administrator to attend those meetings, as we've had in the past. Sometimes you get the instructors. And we've got to stress that the instructors really need to start looking at this material in advance. They need to really understand it as well. I mean, they need to understand calculations and be able to do calculations. And I hate to say that there may be some out there that can't, and there may be some that aren't electricians that are trying to teach this class, but we just got to reinforce that when we talk to the providers. Now, I've already got that noted on my stuff. So, okay. Last piece of business on the agenda here is our 2022 board schedule, which is printed out here. It's February 18th, May 13th, August 12th, and November 4th. I am going to make a recommendation. I feel as though we should make a recommendation that we should increase these to 2 additional meetings, 6 meetings a year at least. We've gone from monthly meetings to 4 meetings a year. And I think as this group continues to move forward, there's going to be more items that we need to be brought up and discussed relative to our requirements and responsibilities as electrical board. So you guys have any problem with increasing these to 6? And we can always, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I would have been happy to have them every month, and because we always fulfilled the meetings, but and we can always cancel it if we have nothing on the agenda, not enough information on the agenda.
No, I think, Mr. Chair, that's a good recommendation. And, you know, like you said, we can always cancel a meeting if we have to.
Karen, you'll reflect that in the minutes that that's our request.
Yep.
Okay. Will that go to Richard, the commissioner, or?
I would send that request to Richard.
Okay. Okay, and you'll do that for me?
Yep.
Okay, thanks, I appreciate it. Sorry for the outfall on that when you responded, but that's all right. All right.
Sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, I said, sorry for the outfall on that when you talked to him.
Thank you.
All right, there a motion to adjourn? Do you no other business? Okay, Mr. Byrd. Mr. Castallo seconded.
I'll second that.
Oh, sorry, Chris. Paul already beat you to it. All in favor? Aye.
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 Again, thank you. And since we're not scheduled to meet till, we could say it next year. Hope everybody has a nice Thanksgiving and nice holidays, Christmas and New Year, and safe. So, and we probably will meet somewhere on something on one of our other committees. So, Karen, you do the same, and we'll be talking, I'm sure.
Yep. Thank you.
Peter and Jim, thanks for attending, and Howard and Todd as well. Sign off. And
Care,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Have a good weekend.